Our first section dealt with absolute monarchs who ruled in Habsburg, Spain, and France. The second section deals with three more monarchies, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, who by about 1750 had absolute control. So it's basically explaining how the exact same thing happened in these three countries. What happens first? We saw again that absolute monarchs would be involved in wars between and among different religious groups, were widespread during, again, what historians have called the Age of Absolutism, when kings and queens could more or less do whatever they wanted. And perhaps nowhere is this more evident in something called the 30 Years' War, which is very complicated. I don't pretend to have a giant understanding of it. I just know that it was a conflict over religious disputes, but also about power in Europe. It started off with rebellious Protestants were tossed noble officials out of a window in Prague, known as the Defenestration of Prague. Again, I have a student who looked at this picture and was like, man, rough day for this guy. He got tossed out of a window. I think he lived. I have to go back and check, though. And it involved areas largely in what is now Germany. Most states in the north were Protestant, while those in the south had remained Catholic. Nice penmanship, Andy. So that gives an idea of the conflict. Ferdinand of Bohemia will be elected what is known as the Holy Roman Emperor, which existed mostly Catholic states that were supported by Catholic countries like Spain, Poland, and other Catholic states. Voltaire famously said that the Holy Roman Emperor was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. It existed in part, sort of, during this time period, but didn't have a whole lot of control, but was a major player in the 30 Years' War. And Protestant countries like the Netherlands and Sweden will wage war against Ferdinand of Bohemia, initiating the 30 Years' War, which lasted in Europe from 1618 until 1648. What was it like? It was brutal. And sometimes I think it doesn't get as much attention. It's very complicated, but different kingdoms would utilize mercenaries, somebody who's paid to fight in a conflict. And when you use mercenaries in a conflict, in a war, there's not really a sense of unity amongst the armies. Lots of times mercenaries are just out for personal gain and glory. So we think that maybe 1/3 of all people in German states may have died as a result of the war. We don't have exact statistics. It's difficult to tell. I referenced this book, The 30 Years' War by Peter H. Wilson. Just looking at this picture kind of gives me an indication of what's happening. I have a knight here in just black armor, and look at the expressions of the people in the background, especially this guy. Guy number one, guy number two, it's almost like he's so appalled he can't believe what's actually happening. 3 is looking on too. The picture's cut out, but he's wielding a mace, I think, and he's about ready to take down. I mean, even the horse looks freaked out. I mean, it was truly a tragedy that happened in Europe for 30 years. This conflicts between Catholics and Protestant states and monarchs who were again seeking to consolidate their power. The text writes down that wolves, not seen in settled areas since the Middle Ages, stalked the deserted streets of once bustling villages. That tells you how devastating it was. The Peace of Westphalia will eventually end the conflict in 1648, a true show of statesmanship to end the conflict, even though it was very unstable. Germany will be divided into 360 separate states. The joke was one for almost every day of the year. We have France, who even in 1648, it still didn't look the same, but Spain and England, these were the established monarchies. Germany was different, though. Germany was divided amongst many states, and Germany wouldn't be united until another 223 years with Otto von Bismarck, but that's another chapter. Again, this big idea. How can this war happen? A king and queen say they want it to happen because either they're fighting in the name of religion or they want to consolidate their power. Eventually, this system is going to go away. What could bring this system crashing down? Again, these are some of these smaller ideas that really are making up still this bigger idea. How can we get away from this system? Habsburg and Austria and Prussia. Charles VI of the Holy Roman Empire had no male heir when he had passed away. He eventually convinced other European monarchs to recognize his daughter, Maria Theresa, as an effective ruler. European powers acknowledged this, but then later refused. We do again have queens who ruled in this time period. Afterwards, after Maria Theresa becomes monarch, Friedrich II of Prussia tried to seize territory by taking Silesia, thereby igniting something called the War of Austrian Succession. Maria Theresa really goes off, and part of the Holy Roman Empire included part of Hungary at the time. She gives this appeal to her Hungarian subjects who typically didn't like her in this grand speech. And after a passionate speech, the noble shouted, "Our lives and blood for you, your majesty." She was able to consolidate, control, and strengthen the monarchy in Austria at the time. This also sounds a lot like House of the Dragon on Game of Thrones, which makes this kind of piece of history look more exciting. Again, a female heir, but people can't accept it. But Maria Theresa was instrumental in establishing control for Austria at the time. Again, seeking that big idea. Kings and queens governed with absolute power. Our text concludes then with Russia, who will be the fifth country that our text writes and was included in the Age of Absolutism. Again, an area that was under the complete control of a king or a queen. Geography plays such a critical role in history. Russia is often described as a kind of a backward country. From 1689 to 1796, it wasn't as advanced as some of its Western nations in terms of industrializing, which will happen later on, because part of it is it's just farther away. Also, too, I'm famous in my class for not famous. They probably think it's probably silly, but I like to draw boats lots of times because boats were the way to develop an effective economy to trade with other countries. If you look at Russia, look how much water it has up here where it can use its boats to trade, but this is the Arctic Ocean. These ports are all frozen at the time. Russia needed what it would call a warm water port so that it could trade with the West. All of this is cold. You can't send ships out to send your goods to another country to trade because this water is frozen. This area, the water is at least a little bit warmer on the Baltic Sea. One of Russia's famous monarchs, so I don't have a picture of him. This might be him. I'm not certain, actually. I should have checked. Peter the Great will be a ruling monarch, and he will defeat the Ottomans and then the Swedes and build a new city, St. Petersburg, bearing his name on the Baltic Sea. It becomes the window to the West. This will help advance Russia's interests by being closer to these other absolute monarchies where they can trade and the economy could grow. Peter visited Louis XIV, who we saw on our last video, the Sun King. He was inspired by the idea of the Age of Absolutism, and he brought some of these ideas back to Russia at the time. He expanded the border and made Russia still the largest country by size, and it remains still the largest country by size to this date. He sent explorers to the Bering Sea and to later Alaska, which is over this way, expanded territory, and Russia, despite still being a poorer country than those in the West, was by geographic standards the largest, also had the largest population. He also had a mixed legacy, though. He expanded Russia's borders, but he also definitely increased the reliance on serfs to complete his objectives. Serfs were land-bound peasants who were really little more than slaves at the time. Again, that big idea. Kings can do whatever they want. How is this going to come crashing down? Peter's successors were ineffective rulers until we get another effective monarch at the time, Catherine the Great, who becomes the new monarch in Russia. She was a German-born princess who, through a marriage alliance, which I can't recall off the top of my head, becomes the ruling monarch in Russia at the time. She grew up speaking German, but she becomes popular with the Russian people by converting to the Russian faith, by learning the Russian language, and really becomes a ruling monarch that the people trusted and really adored later on. Her husband, Peter III, was a very ineffective ruler who liked to play with military soldiers. He was executed in a somewhat cloudy sequence of events that Catherine herself may have ordered. So she becomes the ruling monarch in Russia. She brings Russia into closer ties with the rest of Europe at the time, because in this section of the world, the commerce was more widespread. It was an area where if Russia wanted to become a more powerful country, they needed interactions with the Western Europe. She was also a product of the Enlightenment, which is our next section: new ideas, new ways of thinking. She danced with Voltaire, which our text will talk about. She was also involved in the partition of Poland, an area around here that strengthened the borders of Russia. And by this time, again, to conclude, we have our 5 great European powers: Austria, Prussia, France, Britain, and Russia. And by the time about 1750, the age of absolutism is at its height, when all of these countries have monarchs who have absolute power and can do whatever they want, with the exception of Britain, which is the next section. Britain will have what we will call a limited monarchy. And the British system of government will eventually start to spread. And then we are getting closer and closer and closer to the age of revolution, when kings and queens, their authority will be questioned in 1776, first in what will then later be the United States of America, and then the system will begin to come crashing down in 1789 in France.